Right now, you might be carrying the invisible architecture of everyone else's lives on your shoulders, while your own foundation feels completely hollow. You are the one who listens when the world cracks open, the steady presence who absorbs the panic of others, and the shelter people run to when their own storms become too fierce to manage alone. Yet, in the quiet depth of this evening, you are left sitting with a profound and silent isolation. Nobody notices the structural strain beneath your calm face, because you have become too efficient at pretending you are perfectly solid. You spend your days holding up the walls of relationships, workplaces, and families. But when the night arrives, there is no shoulder for you to lean against. Your mind keeps walking through the problems of people who never think to ask how you are holding up, leaving you deeply stranded in your own competence. Let the cold air of the evening settle outside the window, while the dry warmth of this room begins to embrace your tired body. You can feel the distinct texture of your sheets, the heavy weight of the mattress beneath your spine, and the absolute stillness that is finally yours to claim. The faint scent of old pine resin or dried winter herbs rests in the air, creating a grounded space where the demands of the day are strictly forbidden from entering. You do not have to be the savior of anyone tonight, and you do not have to maintain the illusion of unbroken strength. The heavy structure you have been supporting can exist without your vigilance for a few hours. Your primary responsibility in this darkness is simply to let your own weight drop completely into the earth, allowing the perimeter of your life to fade into the shadows. What you are experiencing right now is not a personal failure, and it does not mean your capacity for compassion has broken down. Your deep exhaustion is simply the natural consequence of trying to be the source of fuel for fires you did not light. We often live under the painful illusion that to care for others, we must burn our own wood until nothing remains but cold, floating gray ash. But true spiritual stability points towards something entirely different. The mind does not find genuine peace by transforming itself into a frantic rescuer who tries to catch every piece of falling debris. True peace emerges when you discover the ancient stillness within you that can hold the warmth of the world without being consumed by the flames. Consider this unexpected truth of the path. Your ultimate usefulness to the world does not lie in your ability to lose yourself in the emergencies of others, but in your willingness to remain immovably grounded in your own center. When you turn yourself into a porous sponge for everyone else's anxiety, you are actually depriving them of the chance to find their own balance on the earth. Loneliness is not a sign that you have been abandoned by life because you are lacking. Sometimes this deep isolation is a profound invitation from your own nature, a call to return to the silent inner sanctuary that does not depend on the gratitude or the validation of those you serve. Tonight, we are not going to force your racing thoughts to disappear by an act of violent will. And we are not going to evaluate whether you have done enough today. We are simply going to examine the heavy machinery of your compliance, observing it with a quiet, unhurried eye until the tension begins to lose its grip. You are safe enough to let your guarded shoulders drop downward, allowing the tight space behind your collarbones to open like a wide winter valley. You do not have to solve a single relationship puzzle before your eyes close. And you do not have to figure out how to carry tomorrow's burdens while you are lying in the dark. Let the metaphor of an ancient, silent stone guide your awareness as we prepare to look beneath the surface of your long exhaustion. Have you ever noticed how much energy it takes to keep an artificial harmony alive when the people around you are constantly throwing matches into the dry grass? You spend your life force running between their small fires, trying to stomp out the sparks before they can touch your own house. This constant state of emergency creates a high, tight vibration in your nervous system, a rhythm that remains trapped inside your muscles even when you are trying to rest. The mind misinterprets this lingering vigilance as duty, convincing you that if you stop watching for one single hour, everything you love will burn to the ground. But this fear is just the smoke of old memories, not the reality of the present moment. In a moment, an old mountain memory will show us something even quieter about the nature of this struggle. We will travel to a place where the winter frost is deep, where the wood turns to ash, and where a single unmoving object holds the secret to an entirely different kind of presence. You do not need to struggle to understand this lesson with your intellect, and you do not need to keep your focus sharp. You can simply let the rhythm of the words wash over your awareness, trusting that whatever your heart needs tonight will settle naturally into the deep soil of your being while the rest of your mind prepares to sleep. Let yourself feel the specific quality of the silence that is growing in your room right now. It is not an empty, hostile silence, but a heavy, protective darkness that is waiting to receive your exhaustion without judging your limitations. You can let your breath move into the lower part of your stomach, experiencing the simple rise and fall of your skin against the fabric of your clothes. You are not required to be wise. You are not required to be steady. And you are not required to be the anchor for a single living soul in this quiet hour. Allow the water of your awareness to settle, letting the heavy sediment of the day drop to the bottom of the pool until the clear space remains completely undisturbed. To see how this weight takes root in a human life, we can look back toward a winter that settled over the high north provinces many generations ago. In the Valley of the Sleeping Pines, the snow had fallen for 40 consecutive days, burying the mountain paths under a thick, silent crust of white frost. In a small monastery built directly into the volcanic rock of the ravine, a young monk named Ren found himself carrying an exhaustion that felt older than the mountains themselves. Ren was not the abbot, nor was he the most senior scholar, but he had somehow become the invisible pillar of the entire community. When the roof leaked under the weight of the snow, it was Ren who climbed the rafters in the freezing wind. When the younger novices wept from loneliness or hunger, it was Ren who sat beside their mats until morning, offering words of steady encouragement while his own hands shook with fatigue. He had learned to anticipate every need before it was spoken, moving through the drafty stone corridors like a silent shadow, ensuring that the older monks had warm tea and that the kitchen never lacked dry split pine. The others praised Ren for his bottomless devotion, calling him the unbreakable anchor of the valley. They did not notice that his face had grown thin, or that his breath had become shallow and tight, resembling the restricted whistle of the wind through a narrow door crack. Ren believed with absolute certainty that if he faltered for a single day, if he allowed his own tiredness to show, or if he admitted he had nothing left to give, the warmth of the monastery would vanish, and the community would splinter in the bitter cold. He wrapped his entire identity around being the one who never required wood, yet always provided heat. One evening, when the thermometer dropped so low that the oil in the lanterns began to freeze and cloud over, Ren entered the subterranean kitchen to prepare the morning fire. The room was dug deep into the basalt rock, a dark cavern illuminated only by the dying orange glow of the main cooking hearth. Sitting on a low wooden bench beside the ashes was Master Jihan, the elderly temple cook who had lived in the subterranean kitchen for nearly 50 years. Jihan was a man of vast silence, whose skin had been darkened by decades of wood smoke, and whose hands were as rough and scarred as tree bark. He was holding a small, flat object in his palms, turning it over and over with a patient, unhurried rhythm that seemed completely detached from the freezing emergency of the winter night. Ren collapsed onto the stone floor near the wood bin, his muscles aching, his mind spinning with 100 separate tasks for the following morning. He felt a deep, biting chill in his chest that no amount of clothing could seem to warm. Master Jihan did not speak immediately, nor did he offer a sermon on the virtues of endurance. He simply held out his hand, offering the small object he had been holding. It was a karishi, a rough hand-carved soapstone hand warmer, no larger than the palm of a man. The stone had no intricate decorations, no fine polish, and no special markings. It was merely a heavy dark block of volcanic earth. Ren took the soapstone into his numbed fingers, expecting it to be cold. But as his skin touched the rough surface, a deep, penetrating warmth radiated immediately into his palms. The stone was remarkably hot, yet there was no fire inside it, no oil burning within its core, and no smoke rising from its edges. Ren held it tightly, letting the heat seep into his frozen wrists, Feeling his ragged breathing slow down for the first time in many weeks, he looked at the elderly cook and asked how a piece of dead rock could hold such a powerful warmth in the middle of a freezing cavern without consuming itself. Jihen smiled slightly, his eyes reflecting the dull amber light of the dying embers. He pointed a scarred finger toward the main hearth, where the great logs had already burned down to a flat, silent bed of gray ash. Beneath that pale dust, the massive foundation stones of the hearth were glowing with a dark inner light, casting a steady wave of dry heat across the kitchen floor. The old cook told Ren that these foundation stones had been pulled from the deepest volcanic veins of the mountain centuries ago. They do not catch fire. They do not produce beautiful sparks, and they do not grow larger when you pile fresh pine branches on top of them. They simply sit beneath the fire, absorbing the heat when the wood burns brightly, and holding that warmth deep within their heavy mass long after the wood has turned to cold dust. Jihan explained that the soapstone in Ren's hands had spent the entire afternoon resting directly in the heart of the embers. The stone did not try to save the wood from burning. It did not try to catch the smoke, and it did not change its shape to please the flames. It simply remained a stone, completely solid, allowing the heat to saturate its core until its very nature became synonymous with warmth. Ren looked down at the dark volcanic rock in his hands, feeling the heat sink through his skin and touch the deep constriction around his heart. He realized that he had spent his entire life trying to be the wood, throwing his own body and mind into the fire to keep everyone else warm, believing that his value was measured only by how quickly he could consume himself for the comfort of the monastery. He had forgotten how to be the hearthstone. He had forgotten that true stability does not come from burning yourself to ash so that others do not have to feel the winter, but from holding a steady, unmoving center that remains warm without changing its form. A profound recognition washed over the young monk in the smoky darkness, as he felt the false necessity of his constant frantic rescue work begin to fracture. But the young monk had only felt the initial touch of the heat, and the true test of this stone wisdom was still waiting for him in a place where the wind was much harsher. In a moment, this story will show us how Ren had to take this soapstone out into the blizzard, discovering that the mind cannot learn to rest until it understands the difference between carrying a burden and simply being an anchor. For tonight, as you listen to the memory of that ancient kitchen, you can allow the image of the warm volcanic stone to rest in your own awareness. You do not have to draw any grand conclusions, and you do not have to change your habits before the morning arrives. Let the slow, heavy warmth of the soapstone settle into your palms, allowing your breath to match the patient, unhurried rhythm of the old temple cook sitting by the ashes. This old memory of the winter kitchen is not an instruction to seal your heart away behind a wall of cold indifference, nor does it ask you to become a detached observer who refuses to feel the pain of the people you love. Buddhist wisdom never demands that you transform yourself into an icy glacier that feels nothing when a friend reaches out in genuine distress. It is pointing toward an entirely different kind of strength, one that lives quietly beneath the noise of your constant emotional rescues. When we look closely at this habit of carrying everyone, we see that what we call devotion is often a deep, unconscious panic, an underlying anxiety that if we do not constantly fuel the emotional fires around us, we will be left out in the cold, unneeded, and unloved. In our modern lives, we translate this ancient struggle into a heavy emotional pattern that can leave us feeling completely depleted by the end of the day. Attachment, when viewed through this lens, is the tight, desperate feeling in your chest that insists a situation must settle exactly according to your calculations, or else you cannot be safe. It is the exhaustion of believing that you are personally responsible for the happiness, the calm, and the stability of every person who crosses your path. Craving becomes the invisible grip that transforms your genuine love into a constant vigilance, making you scan the faces of your family or your coworkers for any sign of disapproval. Because you need their validation to prove your own worth, you try to keep every fire burning perfectly, not realizing that you are throwing your own piece into the furnace to achieve a temporary harmony. The deep insight behind the hearthstone is that our true suffering does not always originate from the difficult circumstances we face, or from the heavy emotions that other people bring into our lives. Life will always present us with freezing winter nights, with moments where the people around us are struggling, angry, or confused. These outer challenges are like the wood that naturally burns down and turns to ash over time. But our true exhaustion grows when the mind refuses to let the fire follow its natural course. We try to grab the burning embers with our bare skin, attempting to manipulate the flames, trying to force a dying fire to stay alive through the sheer power of our own worry. We add a massive layer of self-blame to the situation, asking what we did wrong, why we cannot fix their pain, and how we can stretch ourselves even thinner to compensate for their lack of warmth. Consider what happens when you stop confusing intense gripping with true compassion. The Buddha pointed toward a way of being that does not require you to burn yourself to dust to keep your world warm. Mindfulness in this gentle context is simply the ability to sit quietly in the dark kitchen of your own mind and watch an anxious thought rise, without immediately mistaking that thought for an emergency that must be solved tonight. It is the capacity to notice the internal impulse to rescue someone, to observe the old guilt that whispers you are not doing enough, and to let that feeling sit on the stone floor without obeying its command. You become the heavy, ancient foundation that can hold the heat of the day without changing its shape, allowing the fleeting smoke of others' reactions to rise and drift out through the roof vents without disturbing your inner mass. This spacious awareness does not diminish your ability to love. In fact, it is the only thing that allows your love to become truly dependable. When a piece of wood turns to ash, it is simply following its own nature, fulfilling its own cycle of heat and decay. If you try to become the wood for everyone else, you will eventually have nothing left to offer but the cold, floating dust of your own resentment. But when you rest in your nature as the deep valley stone, your warmth does not depend on how much wood is thrown on top of you, and it does not vanish when the flames die down. You hold a steady, dry, ancient heat that can support a freezing traveler, because you are anchored in a density that external storms cannot compromise. Let this understanding bring a soft sense of space into your chest right now. As you lie in the quiet safety of this evening, you can see that the suffering you feel is not a permanent part of who you are. It is just the heat rash of a mind that has been gripping too tightly for too long. Impermanence reminds us that even the heaviest emotional storms in your relationships will eventually run out of fuel and turn to gray dust if you stop feeding them with your frantic intervention. You do not have to fix the fire tonight, and you do not have to make sure everyone else is warm before you are allowed to close your eyes. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal, moving away from the cold mountains of the past and entering the immediate landscape of your own resting body. In a moment, this wisdom will show us how to practice this stability right here in the dark, turning your own bed into the quiet hearth where the stones can finally cool down. You can let go of the need to be the anchor for the entire world, trusting that the earth beneath you is already holding everything perfectly still, without requiring a single movement from your hands. Allow your breath to drop into the deeper cavities of your frame, feeling the heavy, natural comfort of an existence that does not need to justify its space by saving anyone else from the winter. Let the echo of that ancient winter kitchen fade slightly, leaving only the immediate reality of your own quiet room and the gentle rhythm of your breathing. If it feels right, allow your attention to sink away from the spinning thoughts in your head, letting it drift downward into the physical weight of your body against the mattress. You do not need to concentrate hard or force your mind to become completely empty. Just feel the undeniable pull of gravity holding you securely in place, a silent force that asks absolutely nothing of your energy. The night air around you is calm, completely separate from the demands of the daylight hours, offering a safe boundary where the world is no longer allowed to ask for your help. Bring your awareness to the space just behind your collarbones, a place where you might be holding the high, tight energy of a constant emergency. Notice how your shoulders might still be braced, pulled slightly upward as if you are preparing to catch someone who is falling. See if you can gently surrender that upward struggle, allowing your shoulder blades to sink deeply into the fabric beneath you. Imagine your bones settling into the earth like heavy dark rocks, finding their permanent resting place in the soil. You do not have to hold yourself together with tension anymore. You can let the mattress do the work of supporting your frame, trusting that the structure beneath you is strong enough to hold your entire existence. Now, if you like, imagine that small hand-carved soapstone from the old monk's kitchen resting quietly in the center of your own palms. You can even let your hands rest flat against your stomach, feeling the subtle rise and fall of your breath. Picture the dark volcanic stone absorbing the natural warmth of your skin, a heavy, grounding object that does not require any fuel to maintain its density. As you inhale slowly, imagine drawing a cool, clean breath down into the very bottom of your lungs. As you exhale, feel a heavy, dry warmth spreading out from your center, moving through your arms and down into your legs. You are not stoking a frantic fire to keep the cold away. You are simply allowing your own natural mass to radiate a quiet, steady heat. Perhaps there is a specific worry that has followed you into the dark tonight, a situation where you feel deeply responsible for someone else's emotional survival. It might be a conversation where you felt the desperate need to smooth over a loved one's anger, or a relationship where you are constantly trying to anticipate the next sudden crisis. You might feel a familiar tightening in your chest, the old, urgent reflex to leap up and throw another piece of your own energy into their dying fire. Just notice that urge without criticizing yourself for having it. Even noticing this pattern is enough. You do not have to judge your own heart for wanting to protect the people you care about, because that desire comes from a place of deep and genuine love. But tonight, you can practice loving them without becoming the wood that burns for their comfort. Instead of fighting the anxious thought, imagine that specific worry as a handful of dry pine branches. In the quiet, spacious theater of your mind, picture yourself taking those branches and placing them gently onto the wide, flat surface of your inner hearthstone. Do not try to light the wood, and do not try to blow on the sparks to create a flame. Just watch the branches rest on the heavy, solid rock. See what happens when you consciously decide not to be the fuel anymore. You can let the situation be exactly as cold, as uncertain, or as chaotic as it actually is, trusting that your only responsibility right now is to remain the immovable stone beneath it. Watch as the flames of their demands and their unresolved emotions naturally burn down, turning slowly into soft gray ash. The ash settles quietly over the stone, weightless and harmless. Notice how the massive foundation rock does not panic when the fire goes out. It does not shrink, it does not crack, and it does not lose its deep internal warmth. It simply holds the ash with the same unbothered stillness that it held the roaring fire. You can allow the people in your life to experience their own winter. You can allow them to feel the natural consequence of their own coldness without rushing in to rescue them from the frost. Their emotional weather is not a command for you to destroy your own peace. If the guilt begins to whisper, telling you that letting go is a form of abandonment, just take another slow breath and let the heavy soapstone anchor you back to the present moment. You can remind yourself that holding a boundary is not an act of cruelty, but a profound act of truth. By refusing to burn yourself to dust, you are preserving the only real warmth you have to offer the world. You are safe enough to let the frantic rescue missions dissolve into the night air. The heavy, ancient structure of your own being is enough to sustain you, and you do not have to justify your right to exist by saving everyone who walks through your door. Let this deep thermal stability spread into the muscles of your face, softening the tight lines around your eyes and releasing the grip of your jaw. Your face no longer needs to wear the mask of the perfect, untroubled helper. You can let your expression become completely neutral, resting in the quiet anonymity of the dark bedroom. There is no one here to read your mood, no one here to test your patience, and no one here to drain your reserves. You are completely alone. But it is no longer the aching loneliness of being the unappreciated anchor. It is the rich, restorative solitude of a deep mountain valley, a place where the stone can finally cool its surface while keeping its core perfectly warm. You can return to this heavy, grounded sensation whenever the outer world begins to feel too loud or demanding. There is no need to force this feeling to stay perfectly clear. And if your mind wanders back to the old habit of planning and protecting, you do not have failed the practice. Just gently notice the wandering. Feel the physical weight of your hands resting on your stomach, and let the image of the gray ash remind you that the fire is no longer yours to feed. In a moment, we will follow the young monk Ren out of the sheltered subterranean kitchen and up onto the exposed, freezing ridge of the mountain, where the true strength of this stillness is tested against a much fiercer wind. We will see how this ancient wisdom moves beyond the quiet moments of realization and steps into the harsh reality of a world that refuses to stop demanding our energy. But for now, the wind outside your window cannot touch you. You can simply rest in the quiet aftermath of the fire, breathing slowly, sinking deeper, entirely secure in your own unmoving center. The integration of this quiet stability is never tested in a vacuum, for life does not remain inside the peaceful sanctuary of a dark subterranean kitchen. 3 weeks after Ren received the carved soapstone from the old cook, a terrible northern blizzard swept across the high plateau of the upper ridge. The wind did not merely blow, it screamed through the frozen gorges, carrying razor-sharp ice crystals that could tear the skin from a traveler's face. Word reached the lower monastery that the High Valley Granary, which held the entire winter food supply for the surrounding mountain villages, was in grave danger of collapsing under the sheer force of the gale. Ren did not hesitate. Packing his meager wool robe, he volunteered to climb to the exposed ridge line, driven by his familiar, relentless urge to save the community from ruin. When he arrived at the summit, the air was so thin and freezing that every inhalation felt like swallowing needles. The granary was a massive 3-story timber silo built of interlocking cedar logs, perched precariously on a shelf of dark volcanic rock. Living in a small stone hut beside the granary was Sister Kayo, an old nun who had watched over the mountain storage fields for 40 years. Her face was lined like the bark of an ancient plum tree, and her hands were permanently curved from decades of pulling heavy ropes in the frost. As the storm intensified, the great wooden timbers of the granary began to groan loudly, shifting and twisting under the immense pressure of the wind. Rin felt his old panic ignite instantly within his chest. Looking at the creaking structure, he believed that the safety of the entire province rested solely on his ability to reinforce the beams. He frantically gathered heavy ropes, dragged massive pine braces through the snow, and attempted to wedge his own body against the shifting doors to prevent the wood from splitting. His hands bled, his breath came in ragged gasps, and his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was convinced that if he relaxed his grip for even 5 minutes, the winds would rip the roof away. The grain would scatter into the abyss, and everyone below would starve because of his failure. He was completely trapped in the frantic vibration of the rescuer. Sister Kayo stood out in the swirling snow, wrapped in a heavy wool cloak, watching the young monk exhaust his remaining strength against the unyielding storm. She did not try to assist him with the ropes, nor did she shout words of panic. Instead, she walked over to the main foundation of the granary, where the primary structural timber met the solid rock of the mountain shelf. She tapped a heavy iron rod against a massive, unpolished volcanic stone block that hung suspended from a thick iron chain directly beneath the central pillar of the silo. This stone was an immense dark anchor, weighing thousands of pounds, completely hidden from the view of those who looked only at the tall wooden walls above. What happened next on that freezing ridge changed the way he understood the weight of the world. Sister Kayo called out over the roar of the blizzard, telling Ren to drop his ropes and come stand directly beside the great volcanic anchor block. Ren screamed back through the wind, protesting that if he let go of the braces, the timber walls would surely fracture under the next gust. The old nun simply pointed at the iron chain, her expression entirely calm, her eyes reflecting the gray light of the storm. She told him that the wood was meant to groan, and that the architecture was designed to bend. Trusting her ancient presence, Ren finally let the heavy hemp rope slip from his bleeding fingers, stepping backward with a heart full of terror. The next blast of wind hit the granary with the force of an avalanche. The tall cedar walls tilted visibly, the joints screamed, and the entire wooden tower leaned precariously over the cliff edge. But instead of snapping, The great volcanic stone block beneath the foundation swung slowly, heavily. A few inches to the opposite side, the immense weight of the unmoving stone acted as a perfect, silent pendulum, absorbing the kinetic energy of the gale and pulling the entire wooden structure back into its true alignment. The stone did not fight the wind. It did not try to hold the timber perfectly rigid, and it did not perform any frantic corrections. It simply held its massive, concentrated gravity at the center of the structure, allowing the wood to flex without breaking. Sister Kayo placed her hand on the cold surface of the volcanic block, looking deeply into the young monk's pale, exhausted face. She explained that the granary survived the northern blizzards, not because its walls were perfectly stiff, but because it carried an anchor heavy enough to allow the structure to twist without collapsing. She told Ren that he had been trying to act like a rigid wooden beam, attempting to hold the entire world completely static through his own frantic muscular resistance. By refusing to let the situations around him groan or shift, he was actually increasing the likelihood that his own spirit would snap under the pressure. The true path of the anchor is to remain so deeply centered in your own gravity that you can allow the storm to flex the perimeter without disturbing the core. Ren leaned his forehead against the cold volcanic stone, his tears freezing instantly on his cheeks. For the first time in his life, he fully understood that his constant, anxious intervention was not a form of holy compassion, but a desperate refusal to trust the natural balance of things. He realized that the people he loved, the community he served, and the events of his life all possessed their own internal architecture, their own capacity to lean, and their own relationship with the wind. He did not need to be the wooden brace that shattered itself to keep the wall from moving. He needed to be the heavy, quiet pendulum at the center, providing a space of reliable gravity that allowed everything else to find its own way back to equilibrium. The transformation that took root in Ren that night was not a sudden, magical erasure of his care for the world. The next morning, when the storm finally passed, his hands were still cut from the ropes, and the granary still required quiet, methodical repairs. But his relationship with the labor had completely shifted. He no longer moved with the frantic, breathless rhythm of a man trying to outrun a catastrophe. He worked with a slow, heavy deliberation, breathing deeply into his abdomen, pausing to look at the winter sky between tasks. When a younger monk complained of the bitter cold, Ren did not immediately offer a desperate speech to make him feel better. He simply listened with a wide, spacious silence, holding the complaint without letting it disturb his own internal warmth. Now let this deeper understanding come closer to your own resting frame tonight. You can see that you have been operating like Ren on that exposed ridge, trying to hold the walls of your life completely rigid through the sheer force of your own overthinking. You have been treating every groan of your relationships, every shift in your career, and every burst of emotional wind from others as if it were a fatal structural failure. But you are allowed to drop the heavy ropes of your hypervigilance right now. The structures you love are capable of flexing. The people you care for must navigate their own storms, and the universe does not require you to act as a permanent shield against the winter. Allow your mind to sit quietly with the image of that massive volcanic anchor block suspended in the dark foundation of your being. You do not have to force yourself to become completely unfeeling or perfectly enlightened before you can claim this peace. You only need to make one small shift in your awareness tonight. You can choose to sit with the uncomfortable uncertainty of your unresolved problems, refusing to sprint out into the wind to fix them before the sun rises. You can let the wood creak, you can let the joints groan, and you can trust that your true nature is vast and heavy enough to hold the movement without breaking. As you sink deeper into the stillness of your bed, let the slow, swinging rhythm of the pendulum guide your consciousness toward a state of effortless rest. You are no longer the frantic builder. You are no longer the exhausted protector, and you are no longer the lonely savior of the dark. You are simply the heavy ancient stone, resting at the very center of the mountain, entirely unmoved by the passing weather of the world. When you look deeply into the midnight quiet of your own mind, you can begin to see the intricate, hidden gears that keep you trapped in the role of the exhausted savior. We do not choose to carry the emotional burdens of the world out of simple happiness. We do it because the mind is deeply terrified of what will happen if we choose to set the weight down on the earth. This habit is driven by a profound and unspoken fear of uncertainty, an underlying anxiety that whispers that if you are not actively managing the emotions of those around you, everything will fall apart. You become hypervigilant, constantly reading the subtle shifts in the room, measuring the tone of a voice, and scanning for any sign of hidden tension. This constant state of rehearsal is an exhausting attempt to control the unpredictable weather of human life from behind a wall of total compliance. To maintain this illusion of absolute safety, the mind relies heavily on the painful tools of self-judgment and internal shame. Whenever you feel your own genuine tiredness rising to the surface, or whenever a natural boundary begins to form in your throat, an internal critic immediately steps forward to punish the impulse. You tell yourself that your exhaustion is a sign of deep weakness, that your need for space is inherently selfish, or that you are failing the people who depend on your strength. You attempt to sculpt yourself into a perfectly accommodating pillar by chipping away at your own needs with the sharp chisel of self-reproach. You hope that if you can shame your heart into total selflessness, you will finally become immune to the pain of rejection and abandonment. Over the years, this continuous effort to absorb the storms of others alters the very structure of your psychological identity. You cease to be a fluid human being with your own changing seasons, and you become the person who is always steady, the one who never complains, and the anchor who requires absolutely nothing from anyone. You begin to take a secret, painful pride in how much discomfort you can tolerate without showing a single fracture on your face. This identity becomes a heavy stone armor that you wear even when you are completely alone in the dark. But beneath this rigid exterior, your true self is left starving, isolated by the very wall you built to keep the world from breaking. One of the most liberating insights of Buddhist wisdom is the clear distinction between the primary pain that life naturally brings and the extra suffering the mind constructs through its own resistance. Life will always bring moments of natural coldness, unexpected change, and emotional friction. People will experience their own deep struggles, and their paths will occasionally collide with yours in ways that feel uncomfortable or painful. This initial discomfort is simply the reality of living in a world where everything is interconnected and constantly shifting. It is like the winter frost that naturally blankets the mountain ridgeline every year, a neutral event that belongs to the seasonal rhythm of the earth. To understand how we turn this natural pain into structural suffering, let us consider a fresh image within our mountain landscape. Imagine a massive block of dark volcanic stone that has been carved from the deep belly of the earth and placed at the foundation of a great hall. When the winter storm arrives, the freezing air naturally touches the outer surface of the stone, making the rock cold to the touch. This coldness is the primary pain of life, an inevitable contact with the environment. Now, if the stone simply allows the frost to sit on its surface, its inner mass remains completely solid, balanced, and undamaged by the freezing temperature. The cold simply is what it is, a passing condition of the winter night. Suffering begins when the stone becomes terrified of the frost and attempts to fight the temperature from within its own core. The mind, trapped in resistance, tenses the internal grains of the rock, trying to push the cold away by violently grinding its own crystals against one another. This internal friction, this desperate refusal to let the surface register the actual temperature of the valley, creates a massive structural strain inside the stone. The rock does not crack because the winter wind is fierce. It fractures because it is waging an invisible, exhausting war against its own surface contact with reality. By trying to force the environment to be warm when it is naturally freezing, the stone tears itself apart from the inside out. The Buddha pointed toward a path that does not require you to banish the winter wind or move the foundation stone to a land of perpetual summer. Peace does not mean you find a life where no one is ever anxious, no one is ever angry, and no one ever drops their weight onto your shoulders. True serenity arrives when you change your fundamental relationship with the cold itself. When an emotional storm rises in your life, You can allow your perimeter to register the discomfort without letting that discomfort trigger an internal civil war. You can let the surface be cold. You can let the situation be messy. And you can trust that your deep inner mass is vast enough to hold the contact without fracturing. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal, entering the immediate space of your own midnight reflections as you lie under the dark ceiling. You can begin to see that the immense exhaustion you are carrying tonight is not the fault of the people who asked for your help. It is the signature of your own internal friction, the physical consequence of keeping your entire nervous system tenses against the reality of their struggles. You have been trying to protect everyone from their own winter by grinding your own spirit to dust. Tonight, you can gently forgive yourself for this habit, recognizing that it was just an old, clumsy way your mind tried to guarantee your own place in the world. Let this understanding bring a deep, physical softening to your body right now. You do not have to be the warrior who defeats the frost, and you do not have to maintain a hot fire when the wood has naturally turned to ash. The people you love are held by the same gravity that holds you, and they must navigate the contours of their own stone channels to find their own balance. By dropping your frantic resistance, you are not abandoning them to the storm. You are simply choosing to be the heavy, silent foundation block that remains steady, providing a reliable center of gravity that allows the entire structure to flex safely in the wind. Notice the thoughts that are currently drifting through your awareness, trying to pull you back into the labor of tomorrow's problems. You can look at those thoughts with a quiet, spacious eye, recognizing that they are just passing wisps of smoke, rising from an old fire that has already burned down. They do not have the power to crack your foundation unless you grab them with the tight grip of your worry. You can let them rise. You can let them float through the vents of your mind. And you can let them vanish into the dark night air without giving them a single ounce of your physical energy. As the silence of the room deepens, let your consciousness slide further down into the immense unmoving mass of your lower body. You are safe enough to let the world creak, safe enough to let the relationships groan, and safe enough to let the uncertainty of life exist without your immediate intervention. The earth beneath your mattress is perfectly stable, carrying your entire weight without requiring you to lift a finger or solve a single puzzle before the morning arrives. Allow yourself to rest in this heavy volcanic stillness, trusting that the core of your being remains perfectly warm, perfectly whole, and entirely secure in its own deep center. This ancient wisdom of the unmoving volcanic block is not intended to remain hidden away on a frozen mountain ridgeline. Nor is it meant to be confined to the pages of an old temple scroll. It is designed to step directly into the noisy, complicated arena of your modern daylight hours, transforming the exact moments where you feel most depleted. In the rush of your normal routine, you do not encounter literal blizzards or timber silos, but you face an entirely different kind of relentless weather. You navigate the freezing wind of digital demands, the shifting weight of family expectations, and the heavy atmosphere of a society that insists you must constantly perform to be worthy of existence. The true test of your inner anchor happens in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, when your nervous system is pulled in a dozen different directions at once. Consider how this frantic urge to rescue the world shows up when you are simply holding your phone in the palm of your hand. You might find yourself staring at a blank screen, waiting desperately for a specific text message to arrive, feeling your chest tighten with every passing minute of silence. In that quiet gap, your mind instantly transforms into the anxious monk on the roof, frantically weaving worst-case scenarios and asking what you did wrong to cause this coldness. You might check your notifications every 60 seconds, seeking a tiny spark of digital validation to prove that you are still safe, still wanted, and still needed. This constant checking is nothing more than your mind trying to throw its own internal peace into the furnace, attempting to force a distant situation to warm you up. You carry this same exhausting hypervigilance into the sanctuary of your workplace and your social circles. You might spend your entire afternoon smiling pleasantly, while carrying a massive invisible anvil of exhaustion right behind your ribs, pretending to be completely unbothered. because you believe your only value lies in being the flawless helper who never fractures. When a coworker drops their stress into the shared space, your old reflex fires immediately, demanding that you stretch your hours thinner, sacrifice your own lunch break, and absorb their chaos so the environment remains perfectly stable. You believe that if you do not act as the human shield against their discomfort, you will be judged as cold, uncaring, and entirely expendable. This pattern follows you home into the deep hours of the evening, turning your long-awaited time of rest into another arena of quiet self-punishment. You might lie completely still under your blanket, wanting nothing more than to slip into sleep, yet your mind refuses to grant you permission to close your eyes. An internal judge steps forward, counting up all the tasks you did not finish, replaying an awkward phrase you muttered 3 years ago, or comparing your current life progress to the visible success of a stranger. You feel a heavy wave of guilt for simply lying down, as if resting without earning it through total exhaustion were a form of moral failure. You treat your own physical body like a machine that must constantly pay for its space on the earth through endless labor. But modern practice means recognizing that you can hold a deep, loving connection to your life without transforming your own spirit into the firewood. When your phone remains silent, or when a relationship enters a cold, distant season, you can choose to make a single, quiet shift in your internal posture. Instead of sprinting out into the emotional wind to manufacture a false harmony, you can simply take one slow breath into the base of your spine. You can allow the silence to exist, letting the screen stay blank without deciding that the void is a crisis you must solve before the sun rises. You become the heavy foundation stone that can hold the coldness of the perimeter without changing its shape or losing its true center. This stability changes the way you speak and react in moments of sudden interpersonal tension. When a loved one strikes out with an angry word or a sharp comment, the old habit would have you absorb the blow, instantly contorting your own feelings to pacify their mood. Modern mindfulness allows you to pause for 3 seconds before a single word escapes your lips, creating a vast, protective space between their chaotic weather and your internal core. You do not shout back, and you do not offer a desperate, placating apology to smooth things over. You simply listen from the immense, unpolished density of your own anchor, letting their heavy words drift past you like smoke rising through a roof vent, completely unable to scar the rock beneath. By choosing this path of quiet discipline, you are finally learning how to let the structures around you groan, without assuming that the world is about to collapse. You can love your family deeply, you can support your friends fully, and you can show up for your work with genuine dedication, all while keeping your hands entirely off the ropes of their emotional survival. You can allow a friend to be sad, you can allow a partner to be frustrated, and you can allow a situation to remain completely unresolved for the night, trusting that their inner architecture is fully capable of navigating the wind without your frantic intervention. Your boundary is not a wall of cold indifference. It is the gift of a steady, reliable anchor that refuses to sway with the storm. Let this understanding bring a soft, poetic clarity into the way you view your own tiredness right now. You do not have to achieve a state of perfect, magical enlightenment before you are allowed to put your burdens down on the floor. Peace is not something you must earn by fixing every broken timber in your life. It is the baseline reality that has been waiting for you all along beneath the noise of your constant rescues. You are safe enough to stop treating every anxious thought as an absolute truth that requires your obedience, and you are allowed to rest simply because your body is tired. In a moment, this journey will reach its final destination, moving away from the challenges of the daytime world and dissolving completely into the profound silence of a deep, restoring sleep. We will see how this volcanic stillness settles into the very marrow of your bones, allowing the entire universe to rotate perfectly without a single movement from your conscious mind. But as you prepare to cross that final threshold, let the image of the unmoving foundation block bring a complete, effortless relaxation to your chest. The ropes have been dropped, the ash has settled, and the heavy stone is already resting perfectly still in the dark. The room has grown completely still now, as the dark velvet of the night presses gently against the window panes. dissolving the last remaining borders of the daylight world. You can let the final echoes of the mountain wind fade into the silence, leaving nothing behind but the heavy, comforting density of this immediate moment. The internal work of examining your old habits has reached its natural conclusion for the night. There are no more insights to uncover, no more patterns to analyze, and no more emotional knots to untangle before the morning arrives. The dark volcanic stone of your inner being has absorbed the lessons of the evening, and it is ready to sink out of the light, settling deeply into the ancient, silent bedrock of the earth. Feel the deep weight of your limbs as they rest heavily on the surface beneath you. Your arms are long and relaxed, completely freed from the constant labor of reaching out to catch a falling world. Your fingers are open and soft, no longer gripping the invisible ropes of another person's emotional survival. Let your breathing slow down to a rhythmic, effortless tide, a simple rising and falling that requires absolutely no conscious direction from your mind. You are not trying to breathe perfectly. You are not trying to calm yourself down. And you are not forcing your chest to expand. You are simply allowing the natural gravity of the night to carry your breath, moving in and out like the patient, dark shifts of the valley air. With every slow exhalation, imagine the tiny, weightless particles of your leftover concerns turning slowly to cold gray dust. Let that dust scatter into the dark spaces of the room, completely harmless and completely free of heat. You do not have to watch where the ashes fall. You do not have to manage the trajectory of tomorrow's uncertainties. The entire valley of your life is fully capable of holding its own space while you sleep, without requiring a single protective calculation from your conscious thoughts. The mountains do not fall when the sun sets, and the deep foundations of the earth do not fracture when the light leaves the sky. They simply rest in the heavy, unbothered dark, completely secure in their own ancient permanence. Allow your awareness to drop further down, moving past the thinking mind, past the old anxieties, and sinking into the quiet basalt core of your own physical presence. Your torso feels dense, rooted, and profoundly stable, matching the silent weight of the volcanic blocks that sit beneath the ancient granaries. You are the immovable foundation that has survived the biting frost of the northern blizzards, not because you fought the wind, but because you possess the deep mass to let the storm pass over your surface. Tonight, that surface can finally cool down completely, letting the quiet dark wash over your skin while your center retains its steady, natural warmth. Let the heavy blankets around you feel like the soft, dark earth closing over a stone that has finally come home to the mountain belly. You have permission to abandon your post as the permanent guardian of the fire. You have permission to let the flames die down, to let the logs turn to ash, and to let the room become entirely cold and dark if that is what the night requires. The people you love are resting under this same vast sky, held by the very same gravity that holds your mattress still, and they are safe enough to navigate their own midnight path without your guidance. You are allowed to leave them in the hands of the universe for the next few hours, trusting that the cosmic architecture is strong enough to sustain them. Sink down now, letting your consciousness drift away from the shore of your words and your concepts. The names of your struggles are dissolving into the shadows of the ceiling, turning into light wisps of smoke that rise and disappear into the open night. Your jaw is loose, your eyelids are incredibly heavy, and the space behind your eyes has become a vast unlit cavern where no thoughts are required to speak. You are no longer Wren striving on the freezing roof, and you are no longer the anxious protector scanning the dark for danger. You are simply the deep, silent anchor, hanging perfectly still at the center of the structure, resting in an absolute stability that nothing can disturb. Let yourself go into the heavy density of the deep sleep that is rising to meet you from the bottom of the bed. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to mend, and nothing left to carry through the dark. The world is turning perfectly without your assistance, and the night is wide enough to hold everything you have left behind. And what if the profound safety you have been trying to build for everyone else was already your own nature, waiting quietly beneath the weight of everything you thought you had to save?